Hi, and welcome back to our podcast focusing on the National Cathedrals Conference of 2022. We've got a bit of a departure from our normal podcast video, as normally we discuss what has been said during the conference, but this is an interview with Rocha. How would you summarise the organisation in your own words?
So, Rocha is unique in that it's Britain's only Christian conservation charity. So we work across all denominations, so we're not interested in a label. The Anglican Church is one of the biggest denominations, well, it is the biggest denomination we work with. We also work with the Orthodox Church and Pentecostal Church and Baptists and Methodists. But the underpinning is that they have to be a Christian organisation or charity or church for us to be working directly with them. Otherwise, in the sense, we're only doing what other conservation organisations are doing. So we've got that sort of kind of unique part we play. Then we run 3 primary programmes. Eco Church, which is the church award scheme, and it's a bit like the kind of Duke of Edinburgh award scheme for churches, so it's bronze, silver and gold award. Gold's flipping difficult, and bronze is pretty straightforward, and silver's somewhere in between. And then Regina runs Partners in Action, which is our second programme. You can say about what Partners in Action is. Go.
It's a network of Christian land managers and landowners that just really want to use their land to make a difference for nature and for people, to create incredible spaces that facilitate space for nature to come in, so looking at how you can increase biodiversity on the land, but then also involving the community, the staff or local people, and inspiring other people to do the same. And it's a network where we learn from each other.
So Partners in Action, we've got some really small Partners in Action that are less than half an acre, so sort of city farms. But then we're working with large estates as well, so some of those are several hundred acres. We've got potential partners that are over 2,000-3,000 acres as well. So the main thing is you've got a Christian owner or landowner, manager, who wants to transform the land for community and for nature, and then we work with them to come up with creative plans and ideas of how to do that. But the main thing is you can own virtually no land at all and make an incredible difference to community, and you can own thousands of acres and actually do nothing with it at all. So that's what, the size isn't important, it's what you do with it.
So with obviously you said at the beginning that you're like a Christian foundation.
Yeah.
What is the basis, the foundation of that Christian the Christian faith in the organisation? Because I know there's religious passages relating to environment and animals in the Bible. Is it Bible verses, or is it something else?
Question. I think the first thing is just to kind of distinguish between religious and faith, because they're two very different things. So neither of us are religious. I don't agree with organised religion, so to speak. For me, Christianity is all about having a living relationship with God through Jesus. So it's really simple. And church is basically where you go. So I think the starting point for when you think about environmental issues in Christianity is not that you're living by a set of rules and regulations, but actually you have freedom to express yourself, freedom to be creative. And so Bible verses, there are many Bible verses that are really helpful in being creative. Right at the beginning of the Bible, there's the Genesis narrative, so talking about the story of how the planet originated and how sin and death came into the world, and then the story of Noah and how Noah was rescued and he rescued the animals. But at the end of the story, there's something really significant happens, because they find dry land, and out of the ark come all the animals to start a new life. But some of the animals that come out of the ark, in the culture of the day, would have been really disgusting, dirty, not worth anything. So snakes, for example, animals that crawl on the ground. In the culture of them, when Moses was teaching. In God saying, come out of the ark and multiply, to a creature that was culturally really dirty, it was a huge challenge to the people of the time. It was God's way of saying there's value in all of nature, that as a believer in me, everything has value. It doesn't matter whether it gives you milk, whether it gives you meat, whether you can pick its fruit or grow the vegetables. Everything is of value. And so for me, that's the starting point of a Christian understanding of passionate care for the planet, is there's nothing that is valueless. When you see an insect, when you see a tree, when you see a flower, you see things that have got value to him. God is interested in the small things. And that then is really important because we can feel, and when we look at climate change and just the sheer scale of the crisis, we can feel completely overwhelmed. It's really easy to feel massively overwhelmed by climate change, by a loss of nature, by all sorts of things. And understanding that we serve a God who's interested in tiny little details is so reassuring, because it's like, actually, I can play a part, it can make a difference, it may only be small, but God's interested in small things. So there's no such thing as an action that's too small, and when you put it all together, you get something really beautiful. And my grandma used to make tapestries and quilts, so she was a really keen quilter, but she said the really interesting thing about a quilt is it's made up of hundreds and hundreds of pieces of little tiny bits of coloured cloth. By themselves, those bits of coloured cloth are of very little value and significance. You stick them together into a quilt, and not only is it a beautiful tapestry of colour, but it's taken little parts put together to create that. So I think for me, that's at the heart of biblical teaching on creation. It's this love of small stuff and this belief that God is really interested in you as a person. He's got a personal interest in every single person, a personal interest in every single species. So when something goes extinct, it breaks his heart. And for me, that adds a lot of value to why we're doing what we're doing.
So, on the point about the snake, taking it in more of an allegorical sense than a thing about this tiny animal is just as important as a lion or a rhino or whatever. In the more allegorical sense, if you were viewing the snake as someone or a company that's done harm to the environment, if that company was, for whatever reason, just imagine some miracle, that company does a 180 and suddenly decides it wants to help the environment, how welcoming of their help would your organisation be?
So obviously we're welcome with anybody's help. So I'll give you an example. We run our own nature reserves, and we run a project in West London at a project called Wolffields, which used to be a heroin dealing area. So it was run by a particular guy who used to deal heroin there for 10 years. And it's now an amazing multi-purpose green space with ponds, and it's got beehives and sensory garden and an apple growing orchard and all sorts of really exciting stuff. But we're in a multicultural area, and so a lot of the people and organisations that get involved with us there aren't Christian. They don't share the same faith and necessarily all the same values, but that hasn't stopped us working with them, because we see it as that's a witness. That's just living out our faith with other people who don't have it, and we hope and we pray that they will learn something different from us. But actually, it's not one way. We'll also learn stuff from them. And the person I learned most from there in the last few years is a blind Sikh guy. And so he can see absolutely nothing at all physically. He died last year of COVID. And he wanted to volunteer, and I remember sitting there and saying, this is a Christian project and you're a blind Sikh leader, and I don't understand, number one, why, how is it you're doing practical conservation work when you can't see anything? And number two, it's not a Sikh project, and it's, you know, it's a Christian project, and the two don't seem to. I can't work it out. And he laughed at me, and he just said, so he said, practically, it's a small site, so I know where everything is, and I feel at home here, so I can do stuff, and I know I'm making a difference, even though I can't physically see it. But second, he said, I see you guys living out your faith. You're not stuck in a church behind closed doors where he said, like me as a Sikh, I would never walk through the doors of a church because it's completely alien to me. But I can meet you in a space which is kind of neutral. It's outdoors, it's beautiful. You're living your faith in that space, and I feel I can join you. And I can rejoice in your God with you. And I'll sit by the pond. He said, my favourite place is sitting by the ponds. He built a pond. And I like sitting here, and I like talking to God. I'm not entirely sure what God it is I'm talking to, but I know I'm talking to him. And so he said, it's a safe space, and it's a space where I can communicate with God. And therefore, you're not a threat to me. You're not threatening me. And also, I feel like I'm giving something back to you. And he was, you know, that we were learning from him. And learning from somebody who had ridiculous challenges, you know, from a mobility point of view. And yet, he was passionate. And he stuck with it. And on those days where I sort of felt like giving up, looking at a guy like that who has never given up and didn't give up till the day he died, that to me is a massive inspiration. So yeah, of course we'll work with anybody. Of course we're inspired by anybody. It doesn't mean that we will water down our own beliefs, but it does mean we will stand alongside those who have other beliefs or none and respect them and give them space to throw in their own ideas, because sometimes they're way better than yours. You know, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I think that's a really brilliant way. Building upon that, do you see in the future of your organisation working with other religions, faiths, people who are agnostic and atheists, as ultimately what you're trying to tackle is such a huge problem, world spread, and we live in such a diverse country now that if we really want to go into things, it's probably the most practical thing to involve other communities and also show that Christianity is such a loving faith. My boyfriend's Christian, so I know I get preached a lot about how great it is, and it brings him so much joy. And I know that that's a part of it, is showing love and inspiration to other people.
So I think there's several levels to it. I think the first is that at the heart of the Christian gospel is the figure of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, at the end of the day, your faith should be rooted in a desire for a personal relationship with him. And there are two sides to him. The first is, as you say, it is somebody who is profoundly loving and intimate. Christianity is an intimate religion. But the second part is John 3:16, that no one comes to the Father except through him. And so sometimes they sit in tension, actually, because on the one hand, you want to relate and be in relationship with everyone, and to an extent you need to and you can. But there's part of it that is a unique Christian space, which is not about arrogance or pride, it's just about, that's the reality of what we believe. And that means there is an element that you can't share with people. And so, yeah, of course, an organisation like a Rocha will work with absolutely anybody, whether they have faith or not. And as I just said, a lot of the ideas we get will come from people who have never encountered God in their life in a real way. But there's the other side of it, which is our longing and our passionate desire is for people who are in environmental leadership, for example, like David Attenborough, and where they may not have a personal relationship with God, but we long for them to find that. And it's not about selling it to them, it's about living it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's perhaps hinting at what you said, you know, we can be in a space where we are living out what we believe with those who don't have a faith. But at the same time, we cannot afford to water down what we believe or sound like we're watering it down to make it more appealing to people.
Yeah.
Because if we do that, then we are another wildlife trust or an RSPB or natural England. In other words, we are doing what others are doing, but we no longer give our kind of unique perspective. Does that make sense?
Oh no, completely. Anyone should be able to feel authentic in the place that, especially they're creating for themselves or community themselves. Brings me on to my other question. Churches, as I've mentioned many times, are struggling to keep doors open, especially parish churches, smaller churches. Most people I know are not religious, or at least not publicly religious. And this is a growing trend of children becoming less religious and younger people becoming less religious and more disillusioned with any type of religion. And you talk so passionately about children being the future of saving the climate, and how do you intersect that? Because that's such a difficult boundary of these people aren't religious but they're also the future, and how do we bridge that gap without sounding too preachy but then keeping to your true selves? It's a very thin boundary and line, and it's hard to cross.
So I'd start by saying I'm totally in favour of young people becoming less religious. There is a huge danger to religion, organised religion, because you can lose who you're worshipping in the building or in the songs or in a figurehead and a leader who you look up to and think, wow, aren't they amazing? So religion itself is tremendously dangerous. Faith is not. Faith is dangerous for different reasons, because it can really transform things. So if you take a church or a cathedral space and you think, how can I re-engage with people, young people, for example, who would never walk through the door of this church? So instead of getting them to walk through the door of the church, you grow vegetables or fruit outside the front, or you build a pond, or you put in beehives, or you plant wildflowers. And then you take the service outside and you make it something that is in a language that people can understand, and it sounds like normal sort of English on the street, rather than something which involves words that nobody has a clue what they mean. And the songs are simple and mean something profound and deep to people. And so it's about doing church differently, and connecting to people in a really intimate, simple, special place, rather than expecting them to walk through a door of a building that's intimidating and off-putting and frightens them. So in the talk I said that 75% of Anglican churches have 5 or fewer people under the age of 16. That's the reality. And they're the future, that's the next generation. And why are they not in there? There's good reasons why they're not in there. And by and large it's because they don't see it as relevant. And they see it as religion, it's people trying to do God. And God doesn't want people to do God, he wants to turn it around, and he wants to be God-led, not people-led. Does that make sense?
No, it does, yeah. I have a friend who's Christian. She's called Rocha. I've been friends with her for years, and she thinks very similar to you, and all the Christians I know who are my age, which is, I think, about 3, they all think very similarly. So I think you're definitely capturing the future of what Christianity is probably going to look like, especially from people who I know who are religious. Seems a lot more attainable and a lot more personal, which I think is what you want from a faith. It's a personal relationship with someone.
I personally hate religion, but I also believe that without a faith in Jesus, there is a generation of young people in this country who are really struggling to know what to hold on to, because they're seeing a future that is scary as hell and thinking, I don't have a faith, so where do I go for hope? Where do I go to grab something that's tangible and I can really hang on to and go, yeah, despite everything, I can believe in this. That scares me more than anything else, because I think there's a real relevance to faith that's being sidelined by lots of religious noise. And just go back to simplicity. There's a God there who wants to love people personally and individually, and he offers a way through the mess. He doesn't say the problems are going to go away, but he does say, in the problems I'll meet with you. And that's a really different thing.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about your organisation, but to bring it to the conference, one of the questions I would have is, obviously this conference is taking place in a cathedral, so what would you hope, or what do you think cathedrals can do or are already doing to help the climate and the environment? And an extension of that, I guess, I would say, what do you want this conference to achieve?
So I think the real danger of any conference is you get lots of people at the time who you build up excitement and they say some amazing things and everyone gets super excited, and then they go home and then the next day they've forgotten what anyone said. Conferences are rarely a great vehicle for change. They tend to be a place where people get together, furiously agree or furiously disagree, and they go back. And so I think for me, if this cathedral is going to be a different space, then those who are going back to the cathedrals that they have come from need to take one or two things, actions that they are going to take. Because it's no good just going, yeah, that was really great and it made a lot of sense and I really liked that, but it's about how can I take those thoughts and those ideas from the speakers and put them into action, and being really determined to take action. So it's a little bit like Regina said at the end of the talk, what are the 5 things you're going to take back to your cathedral? What are those things that you're going to change? So change starts with practical action. Change doesn't start with some abstract idea. You've got to actually ground it and do it. And if you're not doing it... So when I was learning to drive, you'll laugh at this, or may not. My driving instructor, it was my second driving lesson, and I was madly steering. I really pulled the gear. I didn't hit anything. And he looked at me, started laughing, and he said, to be honest, in order to really see where you're going, you actually need to move the car. It's like, and I think cathedral culture, like a lot of church culture, is it can feel like people are madly steering and making masses of noise about stuff, but actually the car's not moving. And so you've got to put the accelerator down to see where you're going. And so I think, I don't know whether you were in there, but Julian was talking about you've just given yourself a target of being net zero by 2030. And at one level you think, that's great, they've floored the accelerator and off they go. But they've done the exact opposite. They've talked about flooring the accelerator, but there's no engine in the car. They haven't got anything at the moment that will drive that process. They will not reach net zero by 2030 because there isn't an engine. So they might have pushed a pedal down on the floor, but there's nothing happening. So it is, in summary, it's about taking some simple ideas that they've heard and then putting them into action in their cathedrals, but trying to put them in action in a way that reaches the community. This is not about shutting the doors and going behind closed doors, this is what we're going to do. It's about opening the doors and opening the windows and going, we're going to get out there, we're going to make a difference in the community, we're going to live out our faith in a very real way, we're going to show that we might not be able to avoid climate change altogether, but as a faith community we're going to really support other community initiatives and really make a difference.
Yeah, so to link it to the talk from this morning about the idea of the cathedral as an ark for different ideas to come in and have a safe space to be discussed and then to go back out into the world and to basically be dispersed. Selena Stone discussed something quite similar to what you're saying about solidarity isn't just for optics. You actually have to perform it, like day by day, minute by minute, hour by hour. And if you're not doing that, then you've just said it, and then you put it in a box until the next time you need it, and you take it out of the box again, say it, and then so on and so forth. And so I think that idea of solidarity kind of goes across the issues that the conference covers, but then it also kind of just goes across all issues pretty much in society. It's like you can say something, but whether you actually go out and take action to change it is different. And just to link it again with what Selena said, she talked a lot about intersectionality and how we shouldn't look at social justice as being separate from racial justice or environmental justice. So how do you think environmental justice links to the other issues of the day?
I'll put it very simply. I mean, I've never thought in terms of gender or race anyway, because it's not the way I'm wired. But I think there's no better neutral space than when you're outside in a garden or in a reed bed or in a pond or in a wildflower meadow or in a fruit and veggie patch, where you've got a common aim together, where you're digging something, cutting something, growing something, and the conversations that can happen can be really deep, really profound, really life-changing. But part of it is because you're all doing something creative together, and you all may have different ways of doing it, but that doesn't matter. And so some of the best spaces that the two of us work in are spaces in which community is being created, where they're not thinking in terms of, you just don't think in terms of race and gender, because why would you? You've all got a common aim, and you're all out there doing it together and having a whole load of fun doing it. So, I think the answer to that is we can get really hooked up on thinking, where are the intersections between the environment, race and gender, and actually the biggest intersection of all is that they just don't need to exist. Actually physically can stop thinking about it and talking about it and just get on with it. But time's really short. We do not have the time to waste time thinking, is this a racially safe space, or is this a space in which there's adequate gender equality? Ultimately, if you're working in a space where you're working together on a level playing field, then those things just disappear away, because you're in a space in which you are enjoying each other's differences.
So I'm just generally hopeful for things aren't usually as bad as they look.
Yeah, that's cool.
I'd say that people want to change.
Yeah.
I think that's the only thing that gives me hope. I've kind of realised the fact that I'm going to live in a very poor Britain, and probably very underprivileged Britain, where I'm probably only going to buy a house because my parents have been saving money for me, and I have the ability to save at the moment for myself, and my boyfriend is in the same privilege. But I know that's not the same for everyone. But I think the fact that people want to change, that gives me hope.